Good afternoon and welcome to ITPG Secure Compliance's webinar series CyberCast. My name is Alex Buffington and I'm the EVP of Sales for ITPG Secure Compliance. Today we will be discussing mobile security and its importance within the role of the IT administrator. With us today is Ken Lloyd. He's the CTO and co-founder of Mi3 Security, an application security platform provider, as well as a board member of the CMDSP Certification Association. Ken has more than 18 years of experience in the InfoSec space with a core emphasis on mobile security solutions for both businesses and the consumer sectors. Ken, thanks a bunch for joining us today. With all that's going on today in the ever-evolving threat landscape, the audience and I are definitely interested, given the nature of the webinar, in hearing a lot about mobile threats and solutions out there to mitigate risk and what the CMDSP certification can do for the IT administrator.
Great. So thank you, Alex, for the opening here. I'll go ahead and I'll explain that today. I'll explain about the IT administrator, the mobile IT administrator. We'll talk about the duties and the roles. We'll talk about the security, information around that, how they apply it, how they use it within their role. With that being said, let's go ahead and just jump into the CMDSP itself. So I've been involved with the CMDSP for just over 2 years now. I've been volunteering and helping them create test questions and curriculum. For the past 2 years, I helped develop the early part of the curriculum, and then once we did that, I moved to the education committee, where we both created the test questions and some additional committees, if you will, to manage the accreditation process. So since then, I've been asked to join the board of directors, and I'm here today to present the CMDSP credential and the mobile security around it.
Fantastic.
So let me tell you a little bit about me. So again, I've got about 18 years in the mobile security or in the security industry in general. I got my start creating anti-scumware products, pop-up blockers, and some other things for the consumer space many years ago. And actually created my first piece of software on a dare. That piece of software turned out to be consumed by AOL and then acquired by Earthlink about a year later. From there, I created another company called SpywareData.com, which was a community-driven anti-malware big data collection. I had 500,000 users submitting data. From there, sold that company, moved to Cybervalence, where I dealt with open source intelligence. We dealt a little bit with the mobile security side as well, and then created some antivirus solutions for them. So that brings me to today. I've been with Mi3 Security, a co-founder, for about 5 years. We are involved in the mobile application reputation space, and we'll talk a little bit about that during the presentation.
Okay.
Now, the CMDSP, the Credentialed Mobile Device Security Professional, the mission statement, I'll let you read it up there. But ultimately, the goal of the CMDSP is to promote the position of the mobile IT administrator in every organization, whether it be large or small. They want to educate and train on the best security practices, of the mobile administrator to the employees as well. Now, if you want to know why now, why is this credential important, you just have to look at the explosion of apps and devices. I mean, we have millions of apps. I don't know if anyone really knows the true count. We have hundreds of different Android devices and different operating systems. And of course, we have, iPhone. And then mobile devices themselves are rapidly moving and morphing into IoT devices, whether that be your Apple Watch or even industrial equipment. So centralized management of these devices is critical at this point. It's the wild, wild west. Without centralized management, anybody can install a threat or a risk and impact your organization. Now, the other thing that brings the CMDSP to light now is the consumeration of IT. So we know mobile phones, mobile devices were developed originally for the consumer space with a lot of freedoms and permissions and freedoms and abilities. Moving that technology into the enterprise and putting restrictions on it is very difficult. And trying to maintain those restrictions as new technology comes out is a job. It's designed for the mobile IT administrator. And finally, it's the deperimeterization of IT security. So when you look at network security, deperimeterization means your endpoints have changed. It's no longer a firewall. Now you have data leakage happening, on hundreds or thousands of devices. So those network endpoints are incredibly difficult to control. They're moving now, moving from Wi-Fi hotspot to other Wi-Fi hotspots. And then access to the enterprise backend systems, they're more exposed than ever. So with that, ITs, need to have a person in control who can manage the explosion of devices and apps, etc. Now, CMDSP is 5 years old now. It's a nonprofit out of Maryland. Peter Coddington is the president of CMDSP and the founder. And he created this with some of the original founders of the CISSP accreditation credential. And in fact, some of those founders are now working with ITPG for the accreditation process. So CMDSP is ANSI standards approved, and it's moving through the accreditation process now. It's nearly complete. Now, the team itself consists of more than 30 individuals working on relevant test questions continually. So they do update the exam every 6 months. And they work with authorized training centers to provide that course material. And finally, they focus one-on-one with the candidates and credential holders. So when you call in and you sign up, you're dealing directly with CMDSP. Finally,
and sorry to interject. We have one comment from the audience about the volume. If it's possible, I guess it's a little quiet for some folks who are listening in. If you could maybe project a little more on your voice, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll turn it up a little louder and see if this helps.
Great.
So, thank you. With that being said, accomplishments and recent wins. So Peter recently took a business trip to Asia, Hong Kong and Singapore, where they received at both locations, and they were able to sign up 3 new approved training centers. From there, they're moving into India, Japan, and South Korea. Finally, they were able to win a deal with Arvado, who will be the exclusive distributor, who is the exclusive distributor for Microsoft today. They'll be distributing the CMDSP learning materials worldwide. Now that gives CMD access to over 6,000 training centers. And finally, they're working with the Criterion Testing Network, which has over 1,000 testing centers. And finally, they're in Asia and US as well. So the next question here is, why is this important to the practitioner? In other words, why would I want to go out and spend the time and energy to get a credential? Well, if we just pay attention to that first statistic, 2% of a college IT undergraduate degree, 67% of the salary without a 4-year wait. What that basically means is that you're going to spend 2% of what it would cost you for a college degree to get a credential that'll give you 67% of the salary. Now, we certainly want to go after your degree, but this is the short track, the fast way to get to that job position with the education and experience you need. That being said, with that, you're also going to get trained on the newest technologies and concepts in the mobile administration. Increased visibility as a mobile security professional, you will in essence become the subject matter expert for your organization. So, and if you've been following the career trends, the mobile IT administrator is one of the hottest positions, and I'm pretty sure there's no layoffs right now either. That being said, the average salary is about $82,000 a year for enterprise mobility. Now, we look at why is it important to the employer. So we want the employer to be able to support you. We want them to send individuals to this courseware. So you have to look at the challenges they're facing today. So they're tired. They don't have any budgets. The CISOs, the CIOs, they're getting flooded with mobile security and security issues daily. Without a central resource to manage this, the information is just flowing everywhere. So they don't have patience for the new technology. They're not following the new operating systems. Certainly don't want more hardware. And then you have to imagine the user support demands that they're going through and the user education issues. Without someone providing that information, it's everybody for themselves. So they really do want one person totally responsible for the entire mobility solution. They want to consolidate it. They want this person to be able to control the data leakage outside of the perimeter. They want someone to be able to manage the resources and monitor for mobile threats as well. They can't have IT running around trying to remove threats all day long. So really, they're looking for centralized management with a single person to manage the entire mobility infrastructure. Now, when we look at the course overview, and it's a description of it there, the certificate demonstrates that an individual possesses an underlying core body of specialized, in-depth knowledge necessary to securely manage an organization's mobile device usage. So this is a 2-day course, or you can take it as self-study, and I believe it's $395 for the application fee. So there are 4 domains or 4 areas that they'll focus on: hardware, operating systems, connectivity, and the mobile IT administration role. And the training is focused around mobility from the ground up. Understanding how a mobile device works at the fundamental levels of hardware interaction to more complex concepts of mobile infrastructure and mobility management in the enterprise. So it really runs the whole gamut of the position.
Can I have just a question over some of the things that I've been seeing around this? And I'm hearing a lot about this convergence right now of mobile IT within being embedded now or looked at holistically within your overarching IT infrastructure. I would assume with that kind of evolution happening right now that your current IT administrators would also benefit, of course, from having an added certification, right? If you want to have a broad look across your entire IT infrastructure, it may help, right? At the end of the day, as opposed to, I guess this is more a benefits or negatives against having it as a unique role versus as a dynamic role with the existing IT administrator.
Right. And I believe ultimately that'll depend on the size of the corporation. So if you're a smaller corporation, you're still going to have the security risks, the concerns. You're still going to have the mobility management problem, but you're going to have 2 or 3 people handling all of it. So getting everybody certified for that process is critical, so they can all be on the same page. They're all going to offer input into design and architecture of the mobility systems. When you're dealing with the larger enterprises, of course, having one person manage that or a team manage that is more or less what happens.
Right, okay. Got it. So that really addresses it. If you're a larger organization, it makes sense to have these allocated roles at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I mean, it's allocated roles, it's allocated teams as well.
And just before we kind of dive into the next slide, can you give me a sense of, what is the differentiator between you and some of the other people out there providing similar courses and certifications?
Well, some of the biggest differences, of course, is we don't have any real competitors for mobility at the moment. So our biggest competitor was CompTIA Plus, I believe, and they are no longer providing a mobility program. They actually took the Network Plus and their A Plus hardware exams, built a mobility solution on top of it, and ultimately it didn't provide the benefit to the industry as needed, so they did drop that course. SANS has a mobility credential, but it's more focused on a forensics type approach. What do you do when you have that data leakage and you have a condition? And the other mobility credentials are vendor focused. Mobile Iron has a credential that's just for their platform, same with AirWatch. So truly the CMDSP is the only vendor neutral, job specific credential out there for this.
Got it, okay.
Now, when we look at the credential and what they're going to be teaching you, again, it's a 2-day course. The first day we're going to talk about, hardware. We're going to talk about architecture differences between devices, operating systems. They're discussed, they're illustrated, quite a bit of information about the RAM, the coprocessor, trust zones, chipsets. I mean, all of this hardware is reviewed at that low level. And then we move up to sensors. There's roughly 20 different sensors, I believe, that we focus on, from accelerometers to the Bluetooth to the NFC chip. All that information is covered. And then we deal with, how that hardware functions and interacts, at the OS layer, for the iPhone and, of course, for an Android. So we look at device differences. So it's not just the differences between the Android platform and the iOS platform. Android has 100 different devices out there from 100 different manufacturers. So it's important to recognize some of those differences between those vendors. This makes it difficult to manage across the organization as well. You manage patches and updates for several different Android vendors could be non-existent at times. And then education among users varies between devices as well, so they need to support all of them. So again, we talk about the hardware, we talk about the devices, and then we talk about some of the stuff that's coming down the road. So we know that mobile tablets, are replacing desktops. So that's one of the areas of conversation. How is that going to affect the IT administrator role? We do talk about IoT devices, IoT being watches and Fitbits. If you're in an industrial center, they could be security cameras and machinery controlled through your EMM solution, because it is a mobility platform. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about are the operating systems. So yes, we're going to talk about BlackBerry and Windows. We're going to talk about Android and iOS. But did you know that there were 60 different mobile operating systems out there? So we know about Android and iOS. There's Indius, there's First Touch, QNX, Fire OS, we got with BlackBerry. The list just goes on and on and on. So there's quite a bit of education that needs to go around, understanding the differences between the operating systems. Not all 100 of them, but just the top ones. We look at the mobile processing stack for Android and iOS, and how different they are from the application layer down to the kernel layer. Permission models, we focus on that. We go over the concept of Java bytecode, versus the concept of Objective-C and how that makes a difference. Just as a side note, we identify more I'm not sure if the audience is aware of this, but there are actually more vulnerabilities with Android, but there are more privacy data leakage concerns with iOS. So with this, we look at the operating system, we want to look at vulnerabilities and understand where they can be, and then we want to look at privacy issues and understand how to control them as well. We'll talk about some of the emerging secure devices. Black phone by Silent Circle. Boeing has a black phone out, and SolarAn has a smartphone out also. So security differences. We talk about how the security controls are applied differently. We talk a little bit about mobile threat defense is for iOS in the enterprise setting. We talk about how administrators will rely on app reputation and EMM policy controls to manage the threat defense. We also look at the different options that Android has to lock down the system versus the different solutions that iOS has to lock down. Now, there are different trust zones in the operating systems. We follow that. We go over the concepts of rooting and jailbreaking and how does that affect the enterprise. When should this happen? When should it not happen? Open market versus closed market. Why does iTunes have applications that are apparently more secure but have more privacy issues, whereas Google Play, has more of the threats and the concerns, security concerns on that side. So, we talk about Samsung Knox on the Android side. We talk about Android Safe, AOSP. So we want to look at the security controls that are available on the device, at the operating system layer, and then, of course, security controls that are available within the apps themselves.
Mm-hmm. And so that's like Mobile and AirWatch and Mobile Iron, right?
Correct. Now, we deal with connectivity and network. We deal with security protocols. We want to make sure that we're doing the best to inform and educate the credentials how to identify data leakage. So we're going to look at HTTPS enforcement and understand how to block apps that don't comply and perhaps sniff data to understand when the data leak is occurring. We're going to talk about SSL, TLS. We're going to talk about the certificates, the different ciphers that are being used, and even the concept of certificate pinning. So we focus on VPN configuration for policy and the devices. And then we also talk about the service provider access point names that route traffic to corporate networks. So we're going to focus on some of that equipment as well. And finally, I've been through 13 different credentials now. There's no credential that's complete without the OSI stack. So we are going to focus on the technology stack. And again, we're going to focus on not only the sensors, but a little more in depth on the sensors like Bluetooth. We're going to talk about the different attacks on Bluetooth as well as the different attacks on NFC. And we'll talk about some of the weak areas on wireless, how to configure it properly, what encryption points to use, what devices to use, and of course we look at the protocols. And finally, we're going to teach everyone common vulnerabilities and best security practices, through the entire course. Now, on day number 2, we're going to take all that information, the framework we learned, and apply it to the administrator role itself. So the corporate mobile IT administrator is responsible for installing, configuring, and supporting mobile devices in an organization. They synchronize mobile devices with the enterprise network to monitor, manage, and secure mobile devices inside and outside of the workplace. And they monitor the network to ensure secure connectivity and availability to network users. And they're also responsible for technical support and education. So some of the other job duties here for the mobile administrator that we'll go over is the integration of database centers and servers throughout the building to connect to the mobile network, if you will. Diagnosis, troubleshooting, and resolving, hardware, software, and other issues on the network as it pertains to mobility. We're going to teach you how to secure in-motion and at-rest data on the mobile devices, and we're going to manage the accounts. We're going to show you how to manage the accounts and manage the enterprise mobility solutions. So now we're going to provide critical system support to off hours as well, and to keep information constantly secure by monitoring the network. And then finally, they're going to generate reports detailing the progress and status. Ultimately, the mobile admin position, while we have a list of job duties I just ran through, they're in charge of the entire mobility program. From identifying the devices that are going to be in the organization to rolling them out and managing them. Now, job skills, cybersecurity solutions into mobility. That's huge knowledge. Network design and implementation, systems analysis, information confidentiality. We're going to talk about things like focus on planning, implementation, and management. So we're going to talk about device configuration, encryption, authentication. We're going to talk about apps and secure documents. And then finally, we're going to talk about the EMM management processes itself. So with that being said, let me move to the next slide here. Now the next slide, we'll talk about the CMDSP. And let me move forward to the mobile security technologies. So this is the second half of the presentation where I will review the mobile technologies that they're going to be utilizing within the IT administrator position. So first of all, we really need to define enterprise mobility management. In the simplest form, it's people, it's processes, and technology. It's more than a marketing buzzword, and it's more than an enterprise mobility management suite. So in our purposes for this credential, mobility is everything from the devices to the software to the hardware to the people. So the first thing I want to talk about is some of the security layers that they can apply in the organization. The first one's mobile app reputation. The nickname of this is MARS. So mobile app reputation is the business that I'm in. One way to look at mobile app reputation is they focus on risk and not the threat. And we'll talk about that a little bit here. But ultimately, the difference is a mobile threat defense solution will focus on identifying a threat where we identify the risks before they become threats. Now, it's not antivirus, but it uses part of it. It's an intelligence-driven mechanism, a black box approach, if you will. Now, the difference with MARS, as well as the mobile threat defense, is there's typically not an agent on the device. The mobile app replication solutions are in the back end powering policy and decisions for those applications. So the mobile app replication solutions out there, they're going to look at your network connections. They're going to look for secure communications. They're going to look to see if there's any threats involved, any known names. It'll test those applications for vulnerabilities It'll look for exploits. It'll attempt man-in-the-middle attacks. It'll look at your code usage. Is it proper? Did you apply binary protections, or did this code come from a piece of malware? So ultimately, mobile app reputation is about taking all of the components of the app and identifying them to determine if they're secure and they can be of use. Now, the other thing it looks for is data leakage. Moving on to the next thing, we have mobile threat defense. Now, mobile threat defense is a term that can be applied to the concept of mobile antivirus. It's a technology term. And interestingly enough, the market is actually taking the mobile threat defense solutions and integrating the mobile app reputation solutions into them. Now, why would they do that? So today, the mobile threat defense solution will tell you about a named threat it identified. It really can't tell you much more except for the name and maybe some information. So they look to the mobile app reputation solutions to provide all of that granular detail and then wrap policy around that for the mobility management. So mobile threat defense solutions, they don't work on iOS for the consumer just yet. They do work on iOS inside of an enterprise using what they call a private framework. Now, ultimately, they provide a whitelist and a blacklist identifier. Either you allow that app to run or you do not. And they're typically run on an agent on the device. So the end user can manage the agent, or it can be managed through a central management console. Some of these mobile threat detections will look for vulnerabilities. Some will only look for active threats, and some will actually combine their technology with that app reputation technology for a holistic solution.
Ken, is there a particular scenario in which you may use one over the other?
Well, it's not a particular scenario when you use one over the other. You really want to use both. Let me explain. So the mobile threat defense, their strong suit is identifying the threats that are happening now, where the mobile app reputation is about identifying the risks that lead up to it. So you would want to apply the policy first to remove the threats or the risks, and then if you still get a threat, that mobile threat defense is that last line of action to prevent it.
So moving to I know you're going to hit this next bullet on secure environments, and I've got one that I think a lot of people think about. A lot of the CIOs, CISOs, and IT administrators are already managing, 50 different points right now within their security apparatus. Do these tend to integrate seamlessly within an existing IT infrastructure, security apparatus within the IT infrastructure, or is there more needed?
Well, there's more needed. So the industry is a little fragmented in the sense that you have the large players like a Mobile Iron or an AirWatch that have the ability to integrate third-party solutions. So a company that offers a secure container, a secure document solution, will work with Mobile Iron, so Mobile Iron will manage that rollout and manage that solution. Now, the other piece is where these solutions, the secure document company or the secure container company, have their own enterprise mobility management suite where they want you to use their platform. So that causes some issues. If you have 4 different security layers and you have 4 different management suites, it becomes quite confusing, quite difficult to control. So again, it's a little fragmented in that sense, but we do see a lot of these vendors, migrating their APIs to the large guys so they can manage it centrally.
Right.
So as we're talking about secure workspaces and containers and secure documents, ultimately it's the process of applying a management layer to mobile app without requiring any changes to the underlying application. So what this means is that I can take any application, typically one that I build myself in the enterprise, and I can put a wrapper around it to protect it from 2 things. One, a hack from the outside, or from information from leaking from the outside in. So it controls that information. However, this is typically done at the SDK level, like I mentioned. There are some companies out there that claim to wrap any application. So it's interesting that they can do that. So yeah, the next thing I want to talk about is probably the apps and the OS virtualization here. So
Yeah.
after you have your app wrapping solutions, the next level up is virtualization. So you can virtualize your operating system, virtualize the hardware, and you can run what they call dual persona. So you can have your enterprise mobility solution controlled by the enterprise, but you can still have your personal workspace, and those two do not interfere with each other, and there's no information leakage between the two. And again, this is a management issue because you have to have the enterprise management software from them in order to manage it. So again, multiple layers.
You know, we hear a lot about, at least I have, in fact, there's an engagement I'm dealing with now about containers or wrapping technologies. And what's fascinating is a lot of people adhere and love the fact that you can control versioning a lot of the times with it and deploy single versions across your infrastructure in a unified fashion. But what have you seen are some of the inherent vulnerabilities? Because I've heard that there are some around these container technologies.
Absolutely. So we've actually done some studies where we've taken the app wrapping solutions, and instead of wrapping it with a application we built, we went ahead and took a known piece of malware and wrapped that in the enterprise. And what it turned out to be was a Trojan in disguise, meaning that because it was wrapped, the mobile threat defense could not detect it. It was still functional. There was policy wrapped around it, but if that policy isn't tight enough, you're going to get that data leakage because you do have a malicious Trojan in your environment. So you need to take and you need to ensure that what you're wrapping is safe, you know, free from vulnerabilities or the best you can, and certainly free from malicious attacks. And one of the ways that that's happening is by using mobile app reputation to inspect that app for vulnerabilities and other issues before it's wrapped.
Got it, okay.
Now, give me a moment here. When we look at the next slide here, we talk about mobile security in the enterprise. So mobile security isn't just your device. Mobile security is mobile intelligence. For instance, we know that software developers during the software development lifecycle, you know, are required, or they should be, performing audits or penetration testing throughout that build cycle. Because when you identify a vulnerability or a risk condition early in that build cycle, it's very cheap to fix. If you wait to release day to scan your application for a vulnerability or a risk condition, it's very expensive in order to get that fixed. So what happens are these environments in the enterprise will take you know, a mobile app replication solution and scan it on every single build that they do every day. And this allows them a running log of their changes and the risks that they introduce. So we see that a lot in the software development lifecycle. They use it for continual monitoring of vulnerabilities as well. Now, we look at security operations. So in addition to the EMM implementations that mobile security is typically used for, we are finding that intelligence about the mobile app is being used by corporations to vet vendors. So they want to make sure that the vendors that are offering the mobile apps to their employees do not have data leakage, do not have backdoors, don't have vulnerabilities, adhere to the corporate policy. We know one such case where a chat application wanted to have access to a financial institution, their employees, and use that for their internal chatting. And after they had ran that mobile app reputation and received their intelligence, all communication stopped with that company. So there are times looking at your vendors is incredibly important. We also see SOC integrations. So security operations centers, are starting to use that reputation intelligence to identify unknown threats in their environment. Now, the other thing that mobile, app security is used for, of course, is IT operations. So here, they're looking at the mobile threat detection, for the devices, the operating system, and the apps. And then they're looking for the mobile app reputation to remove the apps that are out of corporate compliance. So mobile threat detection, if you have a threat, you're out of compliance. On the mobile app reputation side, there are thousands of different compliance policies that can be wrapped around there. Now, IT operations are in charge of the management of devices, apps, and people. They're going to take care of the EMM planning, the design, the implementation, and the ongoing management of the vendor software as well. Manage the COPE and the BYOD programs. They are the ones that will administrate the app containerization or secure web-based solutions as well. So they're also responsible for the enterprise app stores. So as these corporations get larger, they host their own enterprise app stores where their employees will go to receive apps that are in compliance. Somebody needs to manage that process. Somebody needs to fill that store up with apps that are compliant. And again, IT operations is in charge of that. They're going to manage the deployments, for the different Android and iOS, the patch solutions, and the vendor and partnerships review. And the one thing I don't want to forget are employees. So they're the weakest link in security. They have a tendency to bypass every security protocol you put in place. On top of that, they're the biggest time resource and productivity loss for IT. Ultimately, you're going to spend hours with them, managing that device if you don't have a solution for it. And then obviously, they're going to install a local threat detection solution to identify the threats as they install it.
Have you seen, as far as you mentioned data leakage, and of course breach is on the tip of everyone's tongue within our space at this point in time. What can, other than what we've kind of touched on, what are other steps that organizations can take to try and have preventative measures against these or countermeasures?
Right. So, first of all, trying to recognize a security breach or a data leak is incredibly difficult. There are companies out there that you bring in to help identify the root cause and what has taken place. The truth is, organizations typically stumble onto a security breach that has been in their environment for a year, and they don't know it. So trying to understand what data was taken or what changes were made when something's been in your environment for so long is a very, very difficult job. So, you have to put that investment in preventative medicine. As we say, nobody wants to end up on the front page of the news on a Monday morning about a breach. So the first step an organization needs to take is put qualified individual in charge of all mobility. Put somebody in charge that's going to look at the trends. They're going to understand the current and latest and greatest threats. And they can, proactively respond. You need to deploy mobile threat defense. You need to have a solution to identify active threats in your environment. And then you need to deploy the mobile app reputation so that you can wrap policy around certain conditions, preventing those threats from occurring. And then finally, you want to secure your communications. So VPN and firewall needs to be in place.
So systems like threat detection applications that are out there like FireEye and some of the players in the industry, do they actually detect it from a mobile standpoint? If the source of the intrusion is mobile, would they be able to? It's basically, does that endpoint get listed within that threat vulnerability or detection application? Is it able to do it, or is this where kind of Mi3 and the likes of you guys step in and really kind of facilitate that?
Well, that's a great question. So you can look at it like this. A mobile threat defense solution, again, will identify a threat condition that's happening. It is sending data. It is a known piece of adware or malware. Now, that is a condition that has already taken place. Now, perhaps your mobile threat defense solution captured it as it was being installed. Wonderful. No damage done. However, if it gets installed and then it's detected, it only takes a few seconds for the damage to occur. So the difference from the mobile threat defense to the mobile app reputation is the mobile app reputation is looking for those triggers, those conditions that could allow that to take place. So if you have your policies in place, that Trojan would never have gotten into your network because you had to put policy in place that says, don't allow any operating system commands, as an example.
Okay. Okay, great.
So, Alex, I'm going to turn this back over to you.
Yeah, and I think what we typically like to do right around this time within our webinar is to open the floor for questions from the audience. I do have one teed up for you already, Ken. So does CMDSP coursework cover Google for Enterprise?
It covers Google, I think it's Google Work or Work for Google, Work for Android. And I apologize, I don't have that exact name. But I'm not aware of it actually handling Google for Enterprise. So Samsung Knox, Samsung Safe, and then Work for Android.
Okay. Okay. So one comment was the bottom line is there is no silver bullet. How do you feel about that comment?
Well, that's true. I mean, I've never seen a security solution claim to fix it all. That's why we have, 10 different, security sectors, from networking to cloud to mobile. There is no single bullet. There never will be. At every turn, every new technology will open up more doors for vulnerabilities and attacks.
Okay. Again, any questions anyone has, please feel free to ask them of Ken right here while we got them. I have a couple of things. I read a lot of stuff. Again, I'm always reading because I came from the software world initially, doing payments and SaaS technologies, and now I'm over on this side of the fence. And it's very interesting to me that a couple of things I've read indicate that, gee, if we just took the proper measures, both, as you mentioned, from a GRC perspective as well as from the technology perspective, organizations more and more, and I've seen this, want to have multi-factor authentication to the end user. And the easiest way to do this, of course, is using your mobile phone to act as another authentication method. So, how do organizations balance it where they get to that point where instead of looking at mobile as a liability, it becomes an asset?
Well, they're actually doing that now. And by the way, interestingly enough, that concept of that two-factor authentication to your phone is actually being dropped by Google so they can go to their application to give you that security code. There are some attack vectors with that two-factor authentication, if you will. So, your phone is in itself a sensor or a data collecting unit for the enterprise. They want to use it as a tool, the best they can.
One question we had here is, how long did it take to get the CISSP to the level it did, and where is CMDSP in that process right now?
Great. So the CISSP is actually a much larger test. It covers 10 domains. I believe it's a 5-day course. Maybe it's a 2-week course. I could be wrong there. And their accreditation process took a lot longer than ours is. So we are probably 6 months away from final accreditation.
Yeah. Okay. A next question, I think we've been touching on this a little bit, is why would any IT staff need a CMDSP? And I think I'll let you elaborate to that one.
Right. I mean, we did cover that. I mean, listen, you have so many mobility areas to focus on. You need to have one person who can manage trends in technology and people. You can't take and assign the people to one department's technology to someone else and expect them to be coherent. You need to have a permanent resource for this.
Yeah. And then what about some of these the compliance necessities that organizations may have out there, right? The regulatory compliance that people have, like HIPAA and GDPR is actually cited here. That's another question.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So currently, when you look at the mobile security solutions that are on there, they don't deal with regulation and compliance as such. Now, regulation and compliance requires mobility to adhere to it. So an organization that has to adhere to HIPAA, the applications used in that environment also have to be compliant to HIPAA. So the CMDSP course will not teach you the intricacies of HIPAA. It won't teach you the intricacies of GDPR. It will teach you how to keep things in compliance by, establishing that policy around it. So, ultimately, when it comes to the GDPR, big push for that. The only thing you can do is apply policy to ensure that you're not violating your organization. Same thing with HIPAA.
Okay. And the questions are flowing in, so this is great. Folks, please keep them coming. We love it. How much employee workflow is transferring from the desktop to the smartphone?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think ultimately it's going to depend on the resources available, in my opinion. So, today, myself, I use the laptop much more than I do my mobile device because all my SaaS platforms are set up to look a lot better on my desktop. But that being said, all my apps are critically important to me. So they are feeding, what I do for work. If that makes any sense, I hope.
Yeah. The next one is, again, kind of a comment that we can elaborate on, in that mobility is not a liability, but should be looked at rather as a major ROI center and productivity tool. And I personally couldn't agree more with that comment.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if we look at mobility and we look at some of the things we talked about earlier, how much time does it take to educate a user, to show them how to configure their device? It takes a lot of time. When you can manage that centrally, you've got that time back. So productivity is increased. It's huge. The more centralized management, the more productivity, the more you're going to get done.
Next one is, does having a CMDSP cert help augment the CISSP?
Absolutely. So, the CISSP is, all about most security domains. But it doesn't have, in my recollection, it doesn't have a mobility section, or a very small mobility section. It certainly doesn't cover the job of the IT mobility administrator. I would highly recommend it with the CISSP, for sure.
Okay. The next one is, since mobile is growing at an amazing pace, how do folks in CMDSP stay ahead of the issues that come flying around the corner?
Fantastic question. So that's the education committee. So the education committee is responsible for paying attention to industry trends and then creating content for the next test. So we are averaging a new version of the test about every 6 months. We want to stay fresh and pertinent to the job.
Okay. So I think that is so far. I haven't seen anything come in, but it looks like we've had our questions come to us so far. And Ken, thank you for answering all of those. I guess at the end of the day, you're just dealing with a really ever-evolving landscape, so I'm sure that's got to be a challenge as well at the end of the day, based on, again, what that last question was. It's really the threat landscape all over is changing, so for you to keep up with that, I'm sure that's a monumental task.
Yes, it is. A lot of reading, a lot of practical application.
Oh, here we have another question in. Can you provide any insight as to how the Fortune 100 or 1000 look like today in terms of protecting the enterprise versus all the new attacks that are being generated?
Let me reread that question and see if I understand what the core is here. So, if we're talking about their positioning, I'm sorry?
Well, I kind of read it as more of a question against what are organizations doing proactively, or are they acting more reactively?
No, they're actually more proactive. So we're seeing large enterprises, implement the whole gamut of mobile security solutions, from the mobile threat defense to the mobile app reputation to secure documents and containers. They really do utilize all these tools. But that being said, we're actually seeing larger organizations, pushing the concept of this mobility IT administrator and app reputation, et cetera, to the other divisions, if you will. So it's spreading rapidly.
Great. And we had a couple more that came in about relating it to mobile, proactive versus reactive. So.
Right. I mean, that can be summed up, into, preparing for a mess or cleaning the mess. Ultimately, you want to ensure that you're protected, you're safe, that when you surf or you download apps, that you're not going to be impacted. That's using mobile threat defense, that's mobile app reputation. That's all a policy around it to ensure what you're doing is good. If you don't do that, you're reactive. You're trying to recapture your data. You're dealing with ransomware. You're dealing with a dead device.
Yeah. And here's another great question of what other IT certifications are there where the CMDSP would complement it and fill in skill gaps that they may be missing?
Well, when you look at what you're doing from the mobility security perspective, having any type of security credential is going to be beneficial, period. I think as a foundation, because they're dealing with hardware, they're dealing with devices, and they're dealing with support, I think a fundamental, hardware certification would certainly benefit that base knowledge.
Okay. What is the difference of an antivirus versus app reputation?
Okay. So antivirus or mobile threat defense, it's a technology that is looking for a pattern or activity of maliciousness. So it means that there is something actually happening on your device at that time, sending data, acting in a malicious way. Antivirus is a solution that's going to come by and say, this guy's a bad actor. He's doing bad things. We have to identify him and remove them. So mobile threat defense handles the identification, the management, the removal, the quarantine of that threat. Now, mobile app reputation comes a step before mobile threat defense. So mobile app reputation can be looked at like this. There's a couple data points on antivirus, your name, etc. And mobile app reputation, can give you over 10,000 data points. So it can tell you everything from the communication to the source code to the certificate, the developer, all that intelligence. It's all available to then wrap into policy, right, versus your antivirus, which is a policy of on or off.
Got it. Okay. Well, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank all of you who have participated. We certainly welcome all feedback from our audience as to how you found this webinar. We will, of course, have it archived should you want to access it later on. And we are certainly available here at ITPG Secure to relay you folks over to Ken should you have further questions about the certification process or Mi3. And Ken, I'd really like to thank you for joining us today, and it was a really engaging conversation. And just again, thanks so much for participating.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, everyone. Thank you, and have a great day.